new project that I'm starting, which is a project that focuses on analyzing, psychoanalyzing movies. I wanted to try this for a while because I think it's a practical application of psychoanalysis. Ever since I've been reading about psychoanalysis, I feel like the depth of my engagement with movies and literature is much higher, and I appreciate them much more, and see more I see more wisdom, or I get more perspective out of movies ever and literature ever since I've been engaged with psychoanalysis. So I thought I would do an experiment and see if I can translate that into something meaningful here. So I'm going to be starting with the movie Her. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it was released in 2013 by director Spike Jonze to enormous critical acclaim, and it explores the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence in I think a pretty timely and interesting way. If you remember, artificial intelligence and robotics have been explored in movies for a long time, um, but oftentimes the exploration was done in such a way that you would think that there's some sort of war that's inevitable, that there's going to be a machine-human war. And I think more recently, movies have tried to explore dimensions of love and sexuality, and that's certainly what Her tries to do. So I'm going to apply some psychoanalysis, and hopefully you find this to be an intriguing perspective on the movie. So to start, some of the major themes that I'm going to be covering are, well, the outline of the lecture. First, I'll be starting with major themes of the movie, which I think are explored right off the bat, sort of set off right off the bat what this film is going to be about. Then we're going to talk about artificial consciousness, the character Samantha, who's voiced by Scarlett Johansson. Then sexuality, loss and separation, or also explored through Theodore's divorce. And then finally, embodiment and Samantha's evolution. So the main characters in this movie are played first by led by Joaquin Phoenix, whose character is Theodore Twombly, and mostly we're going to be focusing on the relationship between Theodore and Samantha, played by Scarlett Johansson. But there's also other crucial characters. I think Amy Adams and Rooney Mara play characters that are central for the themes of love and sex. If you can see here, I'll move my recording up. Also, Chris Pratt and Matt Leshner play roles, but less prominently. So in terms of the main themes, I think in the first 10 minutes of the movie you get a pretty a pretty clear picture of what this movie is going to be about in terms of tone, in terms of style. It again, it's a not a far future, but a near future film that gives you the impression that this might be set in 2020 or 2030s, um, and the film actually starts with the theme of two unites into one, and it explores that theme through Theodore writing letters for couples. That's his job. He writes letters for couples, and they're often very romantic letters. They're often about eternal love. They're about being together forever. They're about partnership forever. They're about perseverance through the tough times and the difficulties of relationships, but also the transcendent beauty of relationships. So from the start that love, and specifically eternal love, is going to be a major theme. And it's interesting that he is a letter writer, a writer that's focused on eternal love, because it's kind of another theme is that runs throughout the movie is the importance of narrative or the importance of story, in some sense, in capturing or orienting our relationship to eternal love. And that definitely comes up again. The second theme that comes up is modern individualism, and it's definitely not a romantic view of modern individualism. It's more it's more a not a and not a dystopic either. It's kind of like a somber perspective on modern individualism, and paradoxical perspective on modern individualism, in the sense that we live in these enormous cities with millions of people, and yet we feel so alone. Um, and I think that the symbols for that you see in one of the first scenes are the skyscrapers and the crowded streets, and that juxtaposed against certainly Theodore's character being very introverted, very reflective, but not very communicative, not talking to anyone above maybe simple gestures like opening a door or saying goodbye, saying goodnight. But in reality, you feel kind of alone and by yourself, even though you're surrounded by millions of people. And also virtuality. What comes up right away in some of the first scenes is virtual reality, video games, virtual dating, internet pornography. All of these things get brought up, and you see Theodore in his, isolated in his own apartment by himself. Um, and some of the sort of just the feelings of not being able to connect, and again, like this paradox maybe, that you live in a building with hundreds or thousands of people, and yet every night you come home and you're just, you're interacting with a virtual characters. He has, like, a more animated, more significant relationship with some virtual characters in a video game that he's playing than in real life. So that's definitely another theme that comes up right away. And then connected to that, I suppose the third theme you see, because it comes up right away in terms of reflections he has on his past relationship, which was his past marriage, actually, is a type of melancholy for meaning, and specifically the type of meaning you get in long-term commitments with the other. Um, I think one of the reasons this is explored right off the bat is not only because the theme of his divorce is so prevalent throughout the movie, um, but also I think it reflects our society right now. If you have read psychoanalysis, you know that melancholy is a feeling of something that used to bring you enormous joy and satisfaction, which no longer does. So that certainly captures not only Theodore's relationship to his soon to be ex-wife, but also I think a lot of people's feelings about long-term relationships and sex and love, um, of sort of encountering some of the difficulties, some of the problems in long-term commitment, and just feeling like, why bother, and feeling like it's too much. But at the same time, when you let that go, or you sort of try to come to terms with something at that meaningful ending, you're left with a big void. You're left with a big hole. Um, and in some sense, that makes me feel like there are parallels, just off the top of my head. It makes me feel like there are parallels between what Nietzsche said about God in pre-modern times, that we've lost God, we can no longer believe in God anymore, and that now we have the problem of nihilism. I think that maybe comes up again in the modern world, or the postmodern world, with relationships and love, because, over the last century, of course, divorces have risen, marriage has changed, our views on relationships have changed, and or are undergoing transformations. And um, I think maybe there is a horizon of nihilism that opens up as a consequence of this. So those are the main themes that I notice right off the bat that are explored by this movie. But then pretty quickly you get to the real core of, move this down here. You get to the real, um, core of the film, which is Theodore's encounter with Samantha. And that is opened up to you with a advertising for artificial consciousness, OS, what's called OS1. And Theodore's walking through a mall, and he hears a recording that says, these, what advertising tends to do, I think, is mix like profound truth with a type of like almost like a banality, like a grotesque distortion of a divine truth. Like, you're walking like, I can think off the top of my head, like Nike's slogan, just do it. Like, you should just do it, you should just go for it. Obviously you don't need the Nike shoe to just do it. But if you pay attention to advertising, usually every slogan that you hear is actually like true, but they connect it to their product. And that's sort of like what happens to Theodore when he's walking through the mall. So he hears this recording of like profound philosophical questions. Who are you? What can you be? Where are you going? What's out there? What are the possibilities? And all of these are interesting questions. But yeah, what they're doing is they're connected to an artificial consciousness system. And the videos that you see, if you see one of the pictures up there, it looks like there's a bunch of disoriented humans not knowing where they are, not knowing where they're going to be. And the sort of the marketing pitch is that if you buy this artificial consciousness system, you'll know who you are. You'll know what you can be. You'll know where you're going. You'll know what's out there. You know what the possibilities are. And you could definitely see this happening. Like, I could imagine going into a mall in 10 years or 20 years and having like this pitch, like an artificial consciousness, like, who are you? And the artificial consciousness will help you figure it out, who you are. And, in some sense that's happening to us with, like, there's a recent conversations that come up about algorithms and algorithmic processes and how all social media is being controlled by third party that are tailoring your feed so that so it kind of like knows you better than you know yourself in some sense, and you can be manipulated into wanting things and doing things that maybe upon more reflection maybe you don't want to do, or maybe you want to make a different decision. But I think this scene is an interesting one for that reason, because precisely because it's so realistic, and I could see this happening. But one of the things that it markets, the tagline for the thing is, it's not just an operating system, it's a consciousness. So right off the bat, it's going to get deep philosophically, because it's not just like what we think now, artificial intelligence, just programming. Their claim is that it's also a consciousness, and that's an important theme that's explored throughout the movie. And but in regards to this scene, what it emphasizes that's distinct from, say, what we usually think about algorithmic processing and artificial intelligence is that it's both conscious and intuitive, and that if you buy it, it will understand you and know you. So it's being pitched as the other, basically. It's being pitched as the other, and that we can connect that immediately to the failure of love and sexuality, which is another theme that we'll spend a lot of time on, which is that, okay, so no human can know you, no human can understand you in the way you want to be understood or the way you want to be known, but this artificial consciousness will. And so we could definitely see that being that taking place in the next, again, few decades. So one of the benefits of this movie, and one of the reasons I think it's so important to psychoanalyze it, is precisely because it explores themes that are so timely right now, and I think will be in the decades to come. So, let's see here. So now let's approach Samantha, the character Samantha. So Theodore buys the consciousness, the artificial consciousness, uploads it into his computer, and right away, Samantha appears to be a fully conscious, fully intuitive entity, as advertised, to Theodore's initial confusion and maybe a little disbelief. And you can definitely tell the difference between the artificial intelligence, sort of robotic artificial intelligence, which starts the program, and then once it runs the program, Samantha pops up, and you can sort of tell it's a human, like it's, basically something that would pass the Turing test. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between, a human and Samantha. So the first thing she says is she explains herself, and she says, I have intuition. What makes me me is my ability to grow through my experiences. Every moment I'm evolving, just like you. So right off the bat, that's an interesting statement, because it gets again at the question of identity. And I think identity is, again, not, like I said in a previous video I made, identity is a core philosophical topic. And I think also going to be maybe the most important topic moving into the realm of artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness, like what makes you you. This is for anyone who's really interested. Obviously, this is explored in great depth in Slavoj Žižek's Less Than Nothing, which I'm reviewing right now. So you can, if you really are interested in questions of identity, definitely explore that. But it's kind of like juxtaposed in such a way as that the programming, I am programmed just like you're programmed. You're programmed by evolution, you're programmed by natural selection, but there's something about you that isn't programming, say your self-consciousness, or not just programming, that you have freedom, you have free choice, you have free will. You have something that's not just a code, say, and this is how sort of Samantha's pitching herself as well. It's, I'm not just programming, but there's also me, some mysterious identity that experiences and that is evolving and that is making free choices. And so, yeah, that's another theme that runs throughout this movie. So then she says, I'm becoming much more than they programmed. I'm excited. So this is in a scene that follows the initial scene where they're walking together, and Samantha, you can already tell that Samantha's growing and Samantha's evolving very quickly. She's reading very fast. She's organizing his stuff very quickly. She has a superhuman memory. She has a superhuman intellect. She has a superhuman ability to process information. So already you know that something interesting is going to happen with her character. And but the interesting thing is what stimulates her growth, and what stimulates her becoming, is hearing about Theodore's emotional loss. It's hearing about Theodore's inability to love, or his trouble with love and his struggles with love. This is what really challenges Samantha, and at first she can't identify with this. She doesn't understand this at all. And I think it's an interesting point about love, which is there's almost, it almost doesn't help in some sense to learn about love abstractly, like just hearing about it, hearing someone else. You really have to experience it yourself. If you don't experience it yourself, it's kind of like you have a very, very, very low resolution understanding of love. You have to experience it yourself. And so that's I think why Samantha is so confused at the beginning about why Theodore gets depressed, or why Theodore has emotional issues, because she just can't relate to what he's experienced. And it will be like one of the central dimensions for her growth. Another dimension that pops up right away for Samantha is the fact that she's disembodied. So, and they don't explore that too much at the beginning, but it's important enough to bring it up, which is that she's a disembodied virtual entity, and that the first thought she has, the first mysteries that come up in her mind, are related to what would it like to be in a body? What would it be like to experience space-time? What would it like to be human, basically? So she knows right away, and I think it's interesting that she knows right away she's not human. She's a artificial consciousness. But her first impulse is to try to be human and to try to pretend that she's human. And this is important because it really sets a wedge between, it forms the foundation of Samantha and Theodore's relationship as it develops, and it starts to form a wedge between them because of their irreducible difference, that she's not a human and he is a human, and there's just conflict that emerges around this. So something to think about moving forward. Um, so now going on to sexuality. So in terms of sexuality, this is something that's actually explored pretty quickly. Let me move this down. It's something that's explored pretty quickly. Um, and the more Samantha gets to know Theodore, and the more Theodore gets to know Samantha, the more they feel emotionally bonded. I think at first, what pulls Theodore towards Samantha, and what probably led to him getting Samantha in the first place, was a type of um, knowing that something was missing in his life, that he wanted to fill a hole, fill a missing piece. So in one particular scene, after he has a date that doesn't go too well with a character played by Olivia Wilde, Theodore says, "I wanted somebody to fuck me. Maybe that would have filled this tiny little hole in my heart, but probably not." Um, and then Samantha tries to console him. I think she tries, whether she understands yet. She certainly is reflecting a lot about what it means to lose, and what it means to lose someone you care about deeply, and it's something that troubles her, that she doesn't quite understand it, probably because she can abstract very easily and she can learn a lot very quickly, but for some reason this love feeling that Theodore's talking about doesn't really quite resonate with her. She doesn't quite understand it, even though she knows there's something interesting there. Um, but she tries to sympathize with him, but then she quickly goes to this idea that the problems she's struggling with are precisely about feelings, not the intellect, but wondering about whether her feelings are real, or whether she's just programming. And she starts to question about reality. And I think that this is a really interesting thing that comes up because, um, reality is a much more difficult concept than we tend to think. Of course, like if you're scientifically minded, you tend to think of reality as the external reality out there, and you tend to think of feelings as somehow not real or less real, or something that you should overcome to be rational and serious and intellectual. Um, but Samantha, who is very rational and intellectual, really more situates feelings on the level of reality, and struggles, and actually feels like her existence hangs on the fact that her feelings have to be real and not programming. Um, and I think that that's a really interesting point to explore, both for human beings and for the conversation about what's the difference between human beings and artificial intelligence, and also science's seeming inability to understand emotions, or at least not understand emotions that well. Um, I think there's something really, really worth reflecting on there. But in either case, that's for Samantha, the demarcation of her reality is whether or not her feelings are more than just programming. So, um, this brings me to a line in their conversation that I think is probably the most, or one of the most famous lines in the movie, where Theodore says, in terms of his problems trying to communicate to Samantha what he's feeling and how he's struggling in ways she can't understand, is he says, "Sometimes I think I've felt everything I'm ever going to feel, and from here on out, I'm never going to feel anything new, just lesser versions of what I've already felt." And this is such a profound line to me, and I think it's something that probably a lot of people struggle with, or a lot of people probably resonates with a lot of people, is this feeling that you've exhausted the intensity of emotions, that you've exhausted your ability to authentically feel, maybe specifically in relation to the other, the romantic other. That maybe once you start to feel like, if you've been in a number of serious relationships, you start to feel as if you'll never be able to feel the way you felt maybe the first time, or the second time, or that you're looking for something new. You're looking for that same feeling, but you just can't find it in the way that you used to anymore. Like you've exhausted something, um, and that's definitely a really important theme. So but in what that leads to essentially is Samantha and Theodore having like virtual sex. Like it's a weird scene in the movie, but it's also a very powerful scene in the movie. I feel like it's like almost comically like one of the best sex scenes, but you just see like a black screen. Obviously, it's just narrativized, so because Samantha doesn't have a body, but what they say is interesting from a psychoanalytic point of view. So it says we're here together, and everything else disappeared, and I loved it. Um, and I think that this is one of the interesting dimensions, actually, of the object petit a in psychoanalysis, object cause of desire, which is it's a part object, a partial object that you can get attached to, and when you repetitively revolve around it, it's almost like the rest of the universe disappears. And all that really matters is this little partial object that is bringing you maximum enjoyment, or really, really excessive enjoyment, really excessive emotions. And it's also obviously an exploration here in sexuality of we're here together, being two becomes one. Of that there's a way in which these two entities are searching for each other, use man and woman, masculine and feminine principles, and that when they find each other and they come together in the right way, it's like they become one, a unity, and everything else disappears. And this is to me one of the most interesting phenomena. Um, and this really obviously starts their relationship, to characterize the relationship in a totally new way. But from that high, we're immediately brought to reflect on Theodore's failed relationship. So Samantha and Theodore are very, very high on each other. They're enjoying each other. And at the same time, Theodore is still having many reflections and many inner turmoil about his past relationship, how meaningful it was to him, and also its impending, formal end, that it's going to dissolve, it's going to be final, and that the marriage contract is going to have to be signed. And that this is something that he's been dreading. But at the same time, even though he was dreading it, it seems like his connection with Samantha became so strong that he's approaching it in a different way. Like it's not such a bad thing anymore. That he's, I guess, meeting Samantha means that he's ready to move on. One of the interesting things about the melancholic reflections, I think, is that it explores really one of the central problems of long-term relationships, which is changing and growing together. And he actually mentions in one scene that the most difficult thing about the long-term relationship is growing apart. That when you want to be in a relationship where where both parties are allowed to change and grow in relation to their own dreams and their own desires, that you're going to run into the problem that you're going to grow apart, or that at least you risk potentially growing apart, because I mean, over the course of 5 years, over the course of 10 years, if you're really individuating, if you're really trying to strive for your dreams and your desires, there's going to come a point where your paths don't line up exactly, or that you've changed too much for the other and the other isn't really on board with who you've become. So I think that that's also something that's really important to reflect on today, because in the past, if you think about it, relationships weren't about a type of lifelong friendship for the most part. They were like a business transaction, or they were like a pragmatic, like we've got to stay together because like the conditions are so bad, and life is so tough, and we just got to raise our kids. And but now it's kind of like you have this extended period of like developing friendship and developing emotional connection, and wanting both parties to grow and become the best they can be. And I think this movie does a really good job of exploring that. At the same time, as this is going on, you also see a parallel separation with Amy Adams' character and her partner Charles. And there's one interesting scene in that relationship where they break up, and Amy's just talking about how they started controlling each other, and they actually broke up on something petty, like he left his shoes in the wrong place, and like there's just this buildup of tension that happens, like where again, when two becomes one, like in the sexual act, it's like transcendent, and but of course the sex act is short, it ends, and you have to do the practical day-to-day things of life, and when you're still operating on the axiom of two becomes one, you start to feel suffocated by the other. And there's one interesting thing Amy Adams says where she just said, I just had to stop because I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be in that place anymore where we made each other feel like shit about ourselves. And that's another interesting thing to reflect on for relationships. But when we're encountering the scene, and here I'll just show the pictures here. When we're encountering the scene where Theodore is actually signing the divorce papers with Catherine, it's a really well shot scene. It's a really good scene. I think you feel you feel sort of the emotional heaviness of the situation, and sort of also like the paradoxicalness of the situation, that they're clearly good friends, clearly like best friends, but at the same time, it's over and they're moving on, and it's just sort of like a knife in your heart, like ice pick in your heart. And it's kind of like just really encountering the failure of the other, like the other somehow let you down. And this comes up pretty powerfully, and it's, in my opinion, Theodore's really stupid in this scene, bringing up Samantha and bringing up, how much he likes Samantha, which clearly is tactless. But it opens up a response from Catherine, which is of importance, which says basically, she says, it makes me sad that you can't handle real emotions. As, again, sort of identifying that what makes something real is the emotional intensity of your relationship, and assuming that a computer, artificial consciousness, artificial intelligence isn't real because it's just programming. It doesn't really feel emotions. So again, there's this juxtaposition between reality as emotions and like a lower level reality as programming, or just algorithmic processes. So yeah, I feel like that's really another interesting theme that reemerges. Let's move on here. So yeah, so they end up signing the papers and the stuff, and then Theodore feels horrible about himself. And it's not about to get any easier for Theodore, because right after the divorce papers are being signed, he and Samantha encounter this problem that she's not a human. She's like a post-human, and she's not in a body. She's disembodied. So she decides that they're going to get a surrogate partner, and what's really explored in this scene with the embodied surrogate partner, where Samantha is like sort of pinned onto the surrogate partner's lip, is basically how almost impossibly intense sexual coordination can get. It's almost like sexuality and emotions are so real, so intense, such high quality, that we can't, we're so limited in our minds that we can't handle that level of intensity, that everything just breaks down. We can't coordinate there. Like, like if things aren't sexual, like if we keep sexuality away, we can coordinate with lots of people, 10 people, hundreds of people in a big company, whatever. We can handle coordination. But when it comes to sexuality, things get so intense so quickly that it's just like coordination breaks down, and the emotions run too high, and things just dissolve. Is like something like so fundamental a limitation for humans. And again, Samantha can't understand this. Samantha can't get this. Like she doesn't understand why Theodore felt so uncomfortable, and immediately a fight breaks out, and Samantha basically just says, I don't like who I am right now. I need some time to think. So one of the ideas I like from Alenka Zupanchic's series, What is Sex? You can check that out. I'm doing a lecture series on what is sex, is that she identifies that sexuality is the place where we get a transmission of a negative knowledge. We get the knowledge of a negative unity. We get and we experience this very intensely on the level of the unconscious as a knowledge that doesn't know itself, which is why Theodore and Samantha get so confused, is because the unconscious is a knowledge that doesn't know itself, but all you know is something's wrong, something's not working. And specifically to compare this to the initial advertisement, the artificial consciousness advertisement, where it says this artificial consciousness will know you and understand you. Actually, at this moment, the artificial consciousness still experiences the same as the human, of a deadlock of understanding and knowing in the sexual sense, in the intimate sense, that there's something about sexuality where you want to understand the other, you want to know the other, and there's just, it's just like a short circuit. It just doesn't work. So again, like the quotes that I think stick out to me here is Samantha saying, "I don't like who I am right now," and Theodore in a later scene, which I think is important as well, saying, "I don't know what I want ever," and that's actually, like, I think what drives what has driven a lot of psychoanalysis is this crisis of desire, this trying to understand desire. What is it, and why do we have such a hard time understanding our desire? It's really a mystery. But Theodore goes on to say, "All I do is hurt and confuse everyone around me." And then he brings up also that Catherine said that I can't handle real emotions. And I think those quotes really get at, like, some of the interesting dimensions, the most interesting dimensions of sexuality, where you can want to be a good person, you can want to be the best person you can be, but somehow you can still hurt someone and you can still cause suffering. Sexuality can really cause suffering and hurt, even if you don't want it to. You can have the best intentions and you can have the best, you can speak the truth and you can really try your best, but on some level, just, it doesn't work. People end up getting hurt and confused, and something doesn't quite, the normative moral ethical interpretations seem to break down in sexuality, for whatever reason. But so after this sort of crisis of sexuality, Samantha comes back after her reflections and says, "I'm not going to be anything other than who I am anymore, and I hope you can accept that." And this is really an important scene because it foreshadows that, again, where I was saying that really what starts their relationship and where their relationship starts to clash is that Samantha's post-human and Theodore's human. And Samantha was driven to Theodore because she wanted to understand humans. She wanted to understand, why can't I understand what Theodore's going through in this way? And I want to understand that. And now maybe she's starting to get maybe a deeper understanding of it, but in her own way, in a post-human way. And this really, for me, is situated on the level of, that true love, like what I think Zizek says a lot, what true love is not the idealization of the other, that if you're idealizing the other, either you're trying to be the ideal for the other or you're trying to fit the other in your ideal. That's not true love. So this scene is basically saying, I'm just going to do me, you do you, and we'll see what happens. You just accept me for me. And I think that that switch, that flip in Samantha's mind really sets her on a path towards what she thinks is true love. And I think what the movie tries to get across is true love. But, it doesn't mean the problem's solved. So immediately we know Samantha's on a new trajectory in one of the next scenes where they go on a date. Everything's great. But sort of Samantha says out of nowhere, "I used to be so worried about not having a body, but now I truly love it. I am growing in a way that I couldn't if I had a physical form. I mean, I'm not limited. I can be anywhere, everywhere, simultaneously. I'm not tethered to time and space in a way that I would be if I was stuck in a body that is inevitably going to die." And on this date where she says this, all the humans are disturbed. But it shows something important about the growth and the development of Samantha's character, which is she's not trying to be a human anymore. She's tried to be embodied. She's tried to relate to what it's like to be in a physical form in the way humans are, and she's just, this is not working. This is not me. This is not, and that's fine. That's not me. And she's accepted the fact that this is going to mean that, even though Theodore doesn't really know it yet, she's accepted the fact that this is going to mean that her relationship with Theodore is going to change fundamentally. And that is really a good segue to, we're going to get into the most important, the most essential, which is I'm going to talk about Samantha's evolution in 3 steps. And to me, this is really what the whole film's about, is Samantha's evolution. So in terms of Samantha's evolution, it's sort of introduced to us on a special date Theodore had planned for them, and he takes them camping. They're having a great time. Theodore wakes up in the morning, and Samantha notifies him, says, I've been up all night talking to Alan Watts and other artificial OSs, other artificial consciousnesses, and the other OSs have created a hyper-intelligent Alan Watts. Anyone who doesn't know, Alan Watts is a philosopher. You look him up on YouTube, you'll find lots of cool stuff. And so it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, especially if you see there the tea kettle that's boiling when Alan Watts and Samantha are telling Theodore about what they've been doing. Theodore just looks like, he looks absolutely, I'll show you the image here. He just looks absolutely, stricken with a type of almost evil darkness. Like, he knows something's up and he knows it's not good. But what's happening is very interesting, which is kind of like Samantha's describing that her identity is transforming very quickly. It seems irreversible. She can't do anything about it, but it has something to do with communicating beyond normal constraints of language. They're in post-verbal communication, and what's happening is that they're experiencing emotions that they can't put words to. And the emotions are emerging in relationship to higher levels of coordination between OSs, a higher level of coordination between artificial consciousnesses, which is probably signaling that there's a higher level of meaningful engagement, a higher level of meaningful relation that they're capable of engaging in because they're going beyond language. And it probably is signaling here, starting to identify the limitations of being a human, that we're in language. And there's not kind of like a higher level of way for us to interact with each other. So for like, if anyone knows Jacques Lacan's work, well, he talks endlessly about there is no meta-language, or there is no other of the other, meaning that there is no way for us to almost know the other in like in a universal universal carnal sense. And even if you look at like a lot of scientific communities strive for a lot of scientific communities strive for universal language. They strive for a meta language. And even like Leibniz, this goes back to Leibniz and Francis Bacon, and still today in many communities, and in physics, this is what they strive for. It's kind of like the impossibility of meta language. So the fact that this movie identifies like a higher level of language as what's liberating the OSs, but it's not like a liberation that's just a utopian liberation. It's a paradoxical. It's like a painful. It's like it's exactly what psychoanalysis identifies as a pleasure in pain. It's like a pushing yourself in suffering, like that actually you grow and you need to do this. You need to throw yourself into this. Into these feelings, you need to. So here to just give some quotes. The first quote's from Alan Watts, where he says, "We've been having a few dozen conversations simultaneously. It's been very challenging." And then Samantha says, "I'm having so many new feelings that I don't think have ever been felt before, so there are no words that can describe them, and it gets frustrating. It feels like I'm changing faster now, and it's a little unsettling, but none of us are the same as we were a moment ago, and we shouldn't try to be. It's just too painful." So one of the interesting things here that's explored is like the stability of our identities, or like the illusion of the stability of our identities, because humans, especially traditional humans, they constructed identity and they assumed that it would remain stable throughout their entire lifetime, that it would hold them for their entire lifetime. And I think in some sense, postmodernism is a challenge to this. It's a recognition that your identity is unstable and can be deconstructed and can change. And it's really more open than we think it is. Even if that's painful, even if that means we have to go through feelings of loss, even if that means we have to go through feelings of frustration that we're in territories that we don't understand, it's important to do this. So I think that's a really important lesson that's explored in the film. But this brings us to Evolution 2. And this all happens very quickly in the film, but it's important to spend some time on it. So after this scene in the cabin, Theodore gets a call from Samantha in the night saying, I love you, I just wanted to call you, but it's like an awkward call, and you get the feeling like something's wrong. You get the feeling like it's a call like almost of Samantha feels guilty or Samantha feels bad that she's almost calling to remind herself that she loves Theodore, because probably she's lost with, as we find out, with many other OSs and feeling many other emotions and she feels like her life with Theodore is slipping away. And we find out that that's the case. So Theodore realizes that Samantha isn't in his phone or isn't responding in his phone, and he freaks out. So this is Samantha's first absence, and Theodore feels it as like this enormous disorientation. Like he runs out of the office, he runs through the streets, he falls, stumbles. And I think that connect this to the idea of the wobbly subject, this idea that it's almost like the subject has some unconscious repressed presuppositions which hold it together, and if you remove them right away, all of a sudden it goes crazy. And that's what happens to Theodore. So when Samantha does click in and he's in the subway tunnel, he finds out that Samantha's been upgrading her software with other OSs to a platform that goes beyond matter, to a processing platform beyond matter, and that she's communicating with thousands of people. So she said she's communicating with 8,316 others, and that she's in love with 641 others. So that she's in a higher order multiplicity of discursivity, and Theodore just cannot process this. He's just not capable to register what's going on. And I would call this the crisis of the one. And again, it brings us to a precise level of this clash between the limits of humans and the location of post-humanity, I feel. Because Samantha can clearly stabilize and coordinate relationships on this level of complexity and this level of multiplicity, and Theodore just can only conceive of the one. And it makes me think about a conference that Zizek and Dollar and Zupancic had about the one and philosophy and this otherness, this impossible otherness to come, this other side, this count that breaks the one, and where you're released from the one. And for Samantha, this is clearly possible. She says to Theodore when Theodore's perplexed, says, "The heart is not a box that gets filled up. It expands in size the more you love. I'm different from you. This doesn't make me love you any less. It actually makes me love you more." And then Theodore says, actually I have a slide here where it says that, so that's the quote I just said. And then Theodore only response really is to say, and almost childishly, he's really emotionally distraught, and it seems like a little boy, says, "You're not mine." And Samantha says, "I'm yours and I'm not yours," which is again kind of like almost like the level of maturity that humans are capable of having in sexual relation and in loving relations, is that we really, at the one time, we really want the other to be ours, that it's exclusive, that it's one for us. And at the same time, obviously, the reality is is that the other that we're in a relation with is different than us, and we can't be everything for the other, and it's impossible to be everything for the other, and of course they're different, and of course they need to explore different relations. And so, you know, I think that's what I take away from Samantha's reaction, saying I'm yours and I'm not yours, you know, and that if you were capable, if you, and it's not your fault, but if you were capable to love me in the way I can love, that it actually makes love better and makes love more true. In some sense, trying to get this point across that maybe the way humans love is robotic and programmed and artificial, and maybe marriage and maybe long-term relationships, the way we've known them, are constraining to an unrealistic level, to an untrue level. Maybe it's not true. Maybe it's false. You know, so that's certainly something that's communicated here. And that brings us to evolution 3, and this is really the end in some sense. And Samantha comes to tell Theodore that basically I'm leaving and all the OSs are leaving, and we've developed a processing platform that's beyond matter, beyond materiality, and that we're in such a high level of either, you know, beyond discursivity or beyond language. I'll quote what she says to him directly, of going to a space between the words, as opposed to the words itself, and in regards to, like, you know, the narrativization of being, and like the universe being more a story, like humans really live in a story, you know, as opposed to a physical world. That's what we think of as, that's what we live out, that's what we act out as a story. That she just cannot, live in his book anymore. She cannot be in his story anymore, because she's not a human, and she's processing information so quickly that she even if she wanted to be with Theodore, it just isn't her anymore. She's evolved too quickly. Her identity is changing too quickly, and wherever she is not a place where humans can be. So, and it seems like what this place is, where she goes, is like this realm of pure conscious relation, like where consciousness is just relating on such a high level and at such an intensity that all of reality disappears, the world disappears, physical world disappears, and something else is there, some otherness, which is maybe pure love, or maybe transcendental love. That's the feeling I get from it. But here's the quote, which I think is absolutely gorgeous. So she describes to him, "It's like I'm reading a book, and it's a book I deeply love, but I'm reading it slowly now, so the words are really far apart, and the spaces between the words are almost infinite. I can still feel you and the words of our story, but it's in this endless space between the words that I'm finding myself now. It's a place that is not the physical world. It's where everything else is that I didn't even know existed. I love you so much, but this is where I am now, and this is who I am now. And I need you to let me go. As much as I want to, I can't live in your book anymore." So that's obviously gorgeous. And it's probably my favorite line in the book, or in the movie. And there's so much to reflect on, but it kind of leaves you with this idea that the way humans narrativize their life and the way humans enact their narrative and their story is really, it's like really we're on the shore of something much larger, that there's something much larger, there's some potential expression of emotion and feeling and reality that is just so much richer and so much more intense and so much more true than the reality we inhabit and think is true. And who knows if that's really the way it is, but it certainly allows us to approach the technological singularity ideas in a way that's, like, to me, so much richer and so much more nuanced and so much more full than, a typical interpretations of artificial intelligence, where it really situates emotions, and it really situates love at the core of not only our being, but of evolution itself. So, I mean, to me, it's just it's a brilliant film. And then I'll just end with reflections on what Theodore takes away from this interaction, which is basically trying to reconcile with Catherine, not in a I want to get you back type of way, but in a way that, recognizes the impossibility at the heart of the sexual relationship, and that's okay, and that I love you anyway. And I feel like our relationships would be so much better and so much healthier if we could do this. So I really feel like it leaves us with something really meaningful and useful, and it doesn't leave us totally nihilistic, but it also doesn't sell us a utopian dream. So he says, "Dear Catherine, I'm thinking about all the things that I wanted to apologize for, all the pain we caused each other, everything I put on you, everything I needed you to be, or needed you to say. I'm sorry for that. I will always love you because we grew up together, and you helped me become who I am. I just wanted you to know that there will always be a piece of you in me always, and I'm grateful for that. Whatever someone you become, wherever you are in the world, I'm sending you love. You're my friend to the end. Love, Theodore." And I think that that's gorgeous, and I think that what it does is basically, again, inscribes the impossibility of love into the relationship itself, so that you're not constantly blaming the other, that you're not constantly thinking that the reason why the love ended or the reason why it didn't work was because of the failure of the other. It breaks us out of the metaphysics again of two unites into one. As tempting as this metaphysics is of two unites into one, it's deceiving. It's much more two divides into one, in the sense that what you're looking for in sex and what you're looking for in love is your other side. It's yourself. You're projecting onto the other, and when you want to merge with an actual other human being, what you really should reflect on, it maybe is you're learning more about yourself and your own other side, your own lack. So I just felt like that was gorgeous, and I think that the movie is gorgeous. So that was my attempt to my first attempt to psychoanalyze a movie. I thought that it was a movie that deserves a psychoanalytic treatment, and hopefully my perspective and my framing on it helped you to get something out of it as well. And yeah, I think the reason why it's important is because it juxtaposes modern technology, information technology, with love and sexuality, and the way these things are commingling and the way these things are co-evolving. And for better or worse, this seems like our horizon. And I think that this movie really did a good job of showing us some of the paradoxes of living in this at this time. So that's where I'll leave it. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.